Howdy folks, welcome to another beautiful day out here in West Vancouver. In today's video we are going to talk about what is probably the single largest housing policy change in the history of British Columbia, far surpassing the demand side policies such as the foreign buyers tax and speculation tax. And that is Bill 44 that was recently passed. Basically what it does is it effectively strips municipalities of their zoning power and it eliminates single family zoning. So let's dig into that a bit deeper. And I'm not here to say whether it's good or bad. Let me tell you what it's all about. So single family zoning is now eliminated throughout the province in areas with a population of greater than 5,000 people. It doesn't mean you can't build a single family house anymore. It just means the municipalities cannot restrict how many units can be built on a single family home. Now, what do we mean by that? A lot of you know about the term NIMBYism. And what that means is not in my backyard. So what happens in a lot of the municipalities, West Vancouver, Point Grey, a lot of the municipalities, is like, you have people with single family homes. They've got their nice big yards and their houses. The last thing they want is for some developer to come and buy a house, break it down and build high density housing, build 6 townhouses or 4 townhouses. People don't like that because it causes traffic and stuff like that, and people say it will devalue their properties, and there's a bunch of arguments around it. So what's happened is the local municipalities have always listened and said, okay, well, we do only allow a single family to live on this land, single family zoning. You can only build one house. That's now completely gone. So they can't restrict multiple units anymore. And here's basically the changes. Municipalities have until June 30, 2024 to update their zoning bylaws to comply with the legislation. So they pretty much have 6 months to get this done. And then it says all single family zoning must now allow one secondary suite and or one accessory dwelling unit, also known as a coach house or laneway. So the minimum that they can restrict it to is now one house plus one coach house or one secondary suite. But then the next line says all single family zoning must now allow a minimum of 3 units on a lot size 3,000 square foot or less. So they cannot tell you that you can't build more than 3 units on a lot of 3,000 square foot or less. So that's the minimum that they are allowed to allow now. Anyway. And lot sizes of larger than 3,000 square foot, the minimum that they're allowed to restrict it to is 4 units. So in other words, you can now go and buy a big stand in Point Grey or in West Vancouver, break it down and build 4 units. We've seen a lot of that in South Africa, actually, there in Bryanston. People would come in, buy up the big piece of land or the old house, break it down and build 4 or 6 townhouse units. And that is now a reality in Vancouver, or in British Columbia, actually. There's a few extra ones there as well, though. You must allow a minimum of 6 units within 400 meters of a bus stop if the lot is larger than 3,025 square foot. So basically, if it's within 400 meters of a bus stop, they can't restrict it to less than 6 units on that stand. Minimum allowable height is 3 stories. Once again, it's not up to, if you want to buy the land and build a single unit, 1 story, you're allowed to. All it says is that the municipality cannot restrict you to only 1 story. The minimum they can restrict you to is 3 stories. So they can only go and say, hey, you're not allowed to build higher than 3 stories. But anything below that is fair game. It sets out recommended legislation for minimum site coverage. I'm not going to go into that. And it also sets out recommended legislation for maximum power requirements, because those are also things that people used to use. Say, oh, look, there's not enough parking, so you can't build this here. The BC government now takes care of it, and it's out of the municipality's hands. Now, it's a full 90-page document, so we're not going to go through all of that. But basically, it is a big change. It's still up to the developer or the person that owns the land to decide what they are going to build. I mean, you know, probably when you come to West Vancouver or Point Grey or those places, you know, if you buy it and you build 6 low-cost units there, you're probably not going to make the same amount as a $7 million high-end home anyway. So at the end of the day, it's still in the hands of the developer, but now the restrictions have been lifted. Then there's, you know, I don't think it's going to spur a flurry of development. I don't think everybody's going to suddenly buy land and start building houses. Interest rates are still high. I know that the developers are still struggling with their development loans and things like that. So I don't see it, but it is coming. When things turn, I think that's going to make a big difference. A lot of people are not happy with it though, because like I said, the whole NIMBY crowd, not in my backyard, they've lost the power that they had to control that. And that's going to cause, you know, that's going to cause some arguments. I can see that coming. All right, so what else is there? Sorry, there's another part of this bill that I just wanted to go over. Oh, and that is the TOD, Transit-Oriented Development. Now, I've touched on it in a couple of videos before, but basically the Transit-Oriented Development says that in transit-oriented spots, so the government is going to identify, designate TOD areas. In those TOD areas, they set out minimum density requirements, and they set up the minimum that you're allowed to build, or the, well, once again, not the minimum that you're allowed to build, but the minimum that you're allowed to be restricted to. So same thing what happened. You know, you have the train stop there, but the local council said you're not allowed to build more than 3 stories over here because, you know, we don't like that. Now that has changed completely. So here we go. Transit-oriented development areas. In a close to a SkyTrain or Canada Line rapid transit stop, within 200 meters or less, minimum allowable density is up to 5, and the minimum allowable height is up to 20 stories. So anybody can now go up to 20 stories without a problem. 200 to 400 meters from the stop, density up to 4, and minimum allowable height up to 12. 400 to 800 meter, density up to 3, and minimal stories up to 8 stories. And then you have the prescribed bus exchange or West Coast Express exchange stations. There, within 200 meters of less, you have up to 12 stories, and 200 to 400 meters up to 8 stories. And then prescribed bus exchanges. Now they pick those, they designate those areas. Same thing, 200 meters or less, up to 10 stories, and 200 to 400 meters up to 6 stories. So what does that mean? That means that we are going to see a flurry of development around these areas, because what's going to happen? I mean, what does a developer want? You don't want to build 5 stories when you can build 20 stories and sell a lot more units. So that's going to happen. The funny thing is that it's actually going to have, well, first let's take one step back. They've already designated 52 of those areas, and in the end they're going to designate about 100 of them. Now that's going to cause some real heartache for a lot of people, because suddenly areas that were protected nature areas or little holiday areas are now going to see all of this big development, and I can see that a lot of the residents are not going to be happy with that. But there's nothing they can do, I think. Well, they're obviously going to try a few court cases, I suppose. Now, if you do own a stand or a house in one of these designated areas, then congratulations, because you just hit the jackpot. I mean, your land value is just kind of shot up. On the other hand, though, you might actually get in trouble, because what happens is, if you own a stand in one of these areas, and that land now has the potential for a 20-story building, what happens is your land has now suddenly become a lot more valuable, and when they come and appraise your land for your annual property tax bill, you are going to be saddled with a much higher property tax suddenly out of the blue. Even if you're still in your same old little house that you lived on there, you are now going to have a ridiculous tax bill because your land value is just skyrocketed. So that's going to be interesting for a few people. But yeah, so that's it. Oh, one last thing. I see that they are also now talking of, so in Vancouver, they had view cones where they were saying, okay, well, if you are standing on this area and you look towards the north, you see the mountains and blah, blah, blah. And that is a protected view cone. So nobody in that view are allowed to build anything higher than a certain height, because if they do, they will mess up the view from this area. So they had these view cones. There's a whole bunch of them in Vancouver and surrounds, or the greater Vancouver metropolitan. And I see that they are even looking at those now. Now, I don't know how the view cone is going to go against the single family zoning. The zoning is already out of the way, but the view cones, I think, still supersedes it, and people are not allowed to go and build a very high building in somebody else's view. But I don't think that's going to be long before that falls as well. So once again, you're going to have a whole bunch of unhappy people, because can you imagine if you have this absolutely stunning view and now suddenly comes and protected view, and now suddenly somebody comes and builds a 20-story building in front of you. Not going to be fun. But anyway, hopefully that will put some, bring some relief to the housing problem and get some more properties built in the future. I don't see it happening very quickly, but it's definitely a step in the right direction if you ask me. I think a lot of people are going to disagree with me, though, not about the fact that it's going to create more housing, but, you know, they're not going to love the idea that it's in their backyard. All right, folks, you all must have a good one. Cheers.